Welcome to the Life as Therapist podcast, where we hear real stories from real therapists. Today's podcast is about picking yourself back up as a therapist. You can see that things are going to look a little bit different today or sound a little bit different. I'm here by myself. We're doing only audio today, and we won't have a guest. But instead, we are going to be going further into tools that we as therapists can use for ourselves when we're struggling. Of course, this applies to clients and especially therapist clients too. But I want you to take time today to really listen to this podcast with yourself and your needs in mind. There will be opportunities throughout this podcast to partake in exercises, and I want you to give yourself the time and space to do that. Three things prompted this podcast today. One, it's been a challenging couple of weeks as a country for those of us living in the US. Two, it's been a challenging couple of weeks for me personally. It's not something that I'm going to go further into today, but a special needs parenting crisis has certainly taken me out on top of everything else going on in the world. And three, in the name of self-care, I started reading a book titled Sorry I'm Late, I Didn't Want to Come by Jessica Pan. And frankly, I can't stop talking about it. So I want to make sure to talk about it with y'all on here today. Each of these events has got me thinking about the idea of support and how we overcome challenging times in a period of life when frankly loneliness is an epidemic. And sorry I'm late, I didn't want to come. Jessica Pan details a year of saying yes to new things in an effort to break self-defeating patterns, partly driven by shyness and anxiety, and partly driven by introversion. Towards the beginning of the book, when she's trying to overcome her fear of talking with strangers in an effort to find friends in her new city, a psychologist she's interviewing states, "That's the truth of the world, Jessica. Nobody waves, but everybody waves back. We are not alone in wanting people around us, in wanting a solid support system. We're yearning for deep connection. As therapists, this is what we do all day. We gain connection with our clients, diving deeper into their vulnerabilities and needs and helping them discover a pathway to healing. But as it should be, this relationship is inherently one-sided. We may disclose here and there, but the goal is always to turn it back to our client. While this makes for successful therapy, it can leave us, the therapist, emotionally exhausted and with little room left to share our own vulnerabilities in our relationships. Part of that is that relationships require reciprocity. Vulnerability requires reciprocity. We have to continue to give when we have already felt like we've given everything we have to our clients. For us to be able to feel like we can share and have reciprocal relationships with people in our lives. I personally find that I'm really good at listening to others and holding their vulnerabilities. Hopefully, I should be as a therapist, but this makes it harder as a person because when it's time for the exchange, well, I am not so good at sharing and being vulnerable. I'm not an ask for help kind of person. That makes it really hard to build or to grow an enduring support system and to lighten my own emotional load. When we, as therapists and people, are trying to overcome something difficult, we need support. We require support. That support can look different for everyone. Today, I'm going to focus in on our inner circles. We need all different kinds of support culturally, systemically, in our community. But what we can control in this moment right now is what our personal inner circle support looks like. So, what I've found for myself and for many of my clients is that while giving support can feel easy, it is literally our job. Receiving support is much more complex because we have to feel safe enough to be vulnerable. So, in a world where we need all different kinds of support and we're focusing in only on our inner circle support, we need three basic things. One, we have to know what makes us feel safe, which can be different from person to person. We have to have enough emotional capacity to be able to share and to be able to uphold our boundaries with people in sharing. And then we also have to take the risk that the other person is going to uphold that safety. So, to know what makes us feel safe, to have emotional capacity to share, and to have the capacity to risk vulnerability. Some of us already have established support systems with people we can trust. We may need to hone our boundaries or even prune our support system over time, but there exists a sense of comfort that we have people we love, who we can talk to, and who will have our back. On the other hand, many of us feel like we never had a strong support system, or that our supports have dwindled over time. So we're left with the task of finding safe people when we're already struggling when we're in that second group. One, we're in the first group, we have established support systems. It's sometimes difficult to even reach out to those supports. But two, there is this other group of us that feel that same sense of loneliness that many of our clients are feeling. And we have to extend our network out to be able to get the basics of what we need for emotional connection. So basically, we have to know what we want, from who, stabilize ourselves enough to be able to ask for it, and care for ourselves in the process of finding and growing our supports so that we can feel held and cared for too. Honestly, that makes me want to stop sometimes before I even begin because it is so hard when we are already emotionally spent. But to be able to continue doing the work that we're doing, we have to begin. We have to start knowing what we want from who and stabilize ourselves so we can care for ourselves, so we can continue doing the jobs that we're great at. Today, we're going to go over three strategies for building support for ourselves. One, understand what makes you feel safe. Two, implement self-care to build emotional capacity for sharing. And three, build distress tolerance to allow for risk. So this is where we're going to get into some more of the activities to be able to truly practice these things. So understanding what makes you feel safe. There's an EMDR exercise called the Safe Calm Place. It's called the Safe Calm Place because some of us might not have any place that feels safe. In the same vein, we may not have a person that feels totally safe. So we have to shift our thinking to someone that makes us feel calm or to somebody that makes us feel safe enough. As you're listening, I want you to close your eyes and picture that person. This can be a real person in your life, or it can be the hope of a person that you would like to have in your life. So sit back, take a deep breath in, hold it, let it go. I want you to take your time with this. Picture yourself with this person. What are you doing? What else is helping you feel safe or calm in this moment? Is there anyone else around? How is this person interacting with you? How are they responding to you? How do you want them to respond to you? And as you reflect on these questions, if you could write down a few words to describe this experience, what would they be? Take a chance if you need to rewind this part of the podcast to be able to slowly go through these questions. Picture yourself with this person. What are they doing? What else is helping you feel safe or calm in the moment? Is there anyone else around? How is this person interacting with you, responding to you? How do you want them to respond to you? And then how would you describe this experience? For me, I imagine myself sitting on my own therapy couch with my partner next to me. I have my favorite cup of coffee and my fuzzy soft blanket, and I'm surrounded by pillows. I know in this moment that no one else can hear us, that there's no mess around me from kids and their sticky fingers. There's no judgment from people who think that they know what to do better than I do. And I can say whatever I need to. My partner is leaning in and may softly touch my hand or my leg in comfort, but also listens when I say I need space. She is validating my feelings and not offering suggestions. I would describe this experience as a warm, loving bubble. And I can take these moments back to that journal where I had you write those three words. And I can journal for myself that I need privacy, acceptance, non-judgment, and softness to feel safe. So by imagining that person in a safe space, I can take from that experience what I need to feel safe: privacy, acceptance, non-judgment, and softness. You can go a step further for yourself and ask who else in my life might fit this criteria. If there's not anyone else currently, would they more likely to fit this criteria if you were able to communicate your needs with them? And if no one else can fit all of that criteria, can they fit some? And what types of things might you feel comfortable sharing with them if they can only fit some? Take your time to think about this and process it through your writing. When we have an idea of what and who we need to feel safe, then we move into giving ourselves enough self-care to build that emotional capacity back for sharing. So the first part is just identifying who you could share with and maybe what you could share with them. You still aren't at the place of having to share yet. We're still back to rebuilding ourselves to get to that point. So you might know who's safe for you or who could be safe with some additional communication, but sometimes we still feel a wall around ourselves. So what we can do with that is going back to basics. And we go back to one of the most basics that we learn in psychology, which is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The hierarchy of needs lists physiological needs above all else. So, are you eating regularly, getting water throughout the day, getting regular sleep? And if these needs aren't fulfilled, we start here. We know that we cannot move into safety and security, let alone love and belonging, until we are caring for our most basic needs. It may even be that we need a few days just to focus on these physiological needs with mindfulness and intentionality to be able to feel safe moving towards accepting task support from someone in our support system, of getting help with little tasks or things that need to be accomplished rather than emotional care from them. I personally was in my own medical appointment recently, talking about water and rest as my primary forms of self-care right now. And my provider pointed out to me that this is a survival level of self-care. And that reminded me just how basic I've had to get for myself to be able to emotionally regulate. I could have taken this as an offense of, oh, but I'm a therapist. I'm being intentional. This is baseline self-care. Of course I know that. But instead, I had to take my therapist hat off and allow myself to realize that, yes, I am in survival mode. I'm not in intellectual, let me figure out all of the things that I need to do mode, but I'm in survival mode, and that is okay. It's certainly not where I want to stay, but anyone in my position would likely struggle with being higher on the hierarchy of needs during a special needs parenting crisis, because that's just the reality of the situation. And we as therapists are not immune to being in survival mode and having a much higher level of needs that requires us starting at the most basic. Next, moving into the safety and security level of the hierarchy of needs. Now, this can mean health, employment, having some of our task needs met, especially whenever we are looking very specifically at our inner circle, at our support system. And this can be as simple as having another person in your life pick up your child from school or pick up your HEB curbside order for you. For most people, asking for support with tasks feels less threatening to our emotional safety, but does allow us to start feeling less alone. We're going back to the journal, and this time, I want you to take a few minutes and write down 3 to 5 tasks of things that you could use help with, whether you want to give those things up or not. What are 3 to 5 tasks that you could use help with today, this week. Now, if you feel able to go a step further, I also want you to write down 1 to 2 people who you feel comfortable asking to help with those tasks. They don't have to be the most emotionally safe person for you in the world. That's really nice when they can be. But they can be a person that feels safe enough to ask for task support. So for me, this may be asking my co-parent to research treatment options for our child or delegating planning for a work event to one of my therapists. As you think about these tasks, I want you to consider what can you let go of right now? How would it feel to take those tasks off of your plate? If we think about our emotional capacity as a glass of water, how much does asking for task support refill your glass? So for me, where lately my water might be at 10%, or my emotional capacity might be at 10% sometimes, asking for task support and getting task support can put 20 to 30% back in my glass. And that is not a negligible amount. That is enough to be able to get to that next level of the hierarchy of needs, which is moving back into love and belonging. Loving belonging is where we go back to that first exercise we did today of figuring out what helps us to feel safe and what people in our lives might fulfill that role of a safe person for us. So the hard part is that now, instead of task support, we ask this person, this safe person or people, for emotional support. Again, we can start small. So sometimes I might want to be like, oh my gosh, I need an hour-long phone call with someone, but I'm tired and I don't feel like explaining all of this over again. Or I don't want to hear negativity or judgment, and I don't know what I have capacity for. So instead of an hour-long phone call, it could be texting back and forth for an evening, or planning to meet up with one of your really good, safe friends once a month instead of the 3 times a year that it can become as an adult. If your safe person is your partner, it could be setting a 15-minute safe place conversation limit where you both know when it will end to prevent overextending your own emotional capacity or, frankly, overextending their ability to respond intentionally instead of getting burnt out and moving into problem solving or being invalidating. So we are slowly working our way up from survival level physiological needs into asking for task support, into dipping our toes back into emotional support that we can receive when we're in love and belonging. So we figured out what makes us safe, who some of those safe people are, working through the self-care that is needed to be able to engage and asking for help from those safe people. Lastly, we have to acknowledge that vulnerability, asking for help, sharing our story will always come with risk. We can put in all of the protection possible to take care of our needs slowly, to ask for minimal support, to be intentional in who we would go to for emotional support and put boundaries on those interactions to get the best possible outcome. But most of us have been let down by systems meant to help or by people that we love that we thought would be there for us, but instead let us down. That makes it really scary to ask for support. Even scarier when we're trying to meet new people because we don't have the kind of support that we need already. What do we do about that? How do we get comfortable with the risk of vulnerability when we have been let down in the past, when it feels impossible to extend yourself in that way? One of the ways that we can do that is learning to be okay with no. I think back to a book that I used to read to one of my children called I Don't Like the Sound of No. And I resonate with that book so much right now. But I also turn back to the book that inspired part of this podcast today, the Sorry I'm Late, I Didn't Want to Come. In this book, Jessica is undergoing the massive task of putting herself out there. And within that, she's tasked with asking people on the subway in London the absolutely absurd question if they know who the Queen of England is. Part of her exposure therapy of sorts here is that she knows that she's going to get odd looks and confusion as the standard baseline response. That it's not, we'll ask a question, some might be great, some might not be great, you might be told no. No, the beginning of her process was knowing that she was going to be told no and doing it anyways, knowing that she was going to be looked at like she had two heads and doing it anyways. So once Jessica asks 10 people who the Queen of England is in the middle of London, she starts to feel more comfortable with the process of talking to strangers because being rejected isn't as scary anymore when it happens and you realize that you have survived. When it happens and it wasn't the worst thing that's ever happened to you before. That might change who we reach out to first because rejection from some people that we deeply care about might feel like the worst thing in the world. But going back to trying to rebuild our systems, we are asking those absurd questions to the most vulnerable. We're asking them of people that we are trying to begin to let into our circle of support, to new people. So, right now, going back to your journal, I want you to ask yourself the question, what is the worst thing that will happen if I hear no? If the repercussions are too big, is there a different person you can ask? Or a different thing that you can ask for that's less threatening to your emotional capacity? I don't expect anyone listening to this podcast right now to ask a stranger who the Queen of England is, but you may consider asking that one other therapist you always see on Facebook for coffee, or messaging a friend that you haven't seen in a while to see how they're doing and to reach out for support that they might be willing, ready, and able to give to you, or to at least start the process of rekindling that friendship to a level that feels sustainable for both of you. I certainly don't have all of the answers. What I do know is that we deserve to care for ourselves in the way that we encourage our clients to. So we learn what makes you feel safe, go back to basics, and start small when practicing vulnerability and rebuilding or growing your support system. You can go back through and listen to the parts of this podcast as many times as you need to be able to stop, start, journal, ask yourself the questions of what is going to be most helpful for you in this moment in time right now when it comes to inner circle support and building your interpersonal support system. I'm going to go ahead and put the timestamps on these questions in the show notes for you to be able to click to be able to move through this in whatever way is helpful to you. And in 2 weeks, we're going to be back to our regularly scheduled programming with another guest. And if it's been helpful to be able to have tools like this, I would love to hear from you and hear the things that you would like for us to talk about, in addition to telling our real human therapist stories. Take care, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.